Sarah Miller, a 45-year-old Amish widow, becomes the laughingstock of her community when she uses her last $8,000 to purchase a neglected, trash-filled lake property that everyone considers worthless. Mocked by neighbors and even her own church elders, Sarah sees something others don't: a chance to build a peaceful sanctuary for her 21-year-old son, Jacob, who has been struggling with the recent loss of his father. As the community's ridicule intensifies and their financial situation becomes desperate, Jacob discovers something extraordinary hidden beneath the murky waters that will not only change their lives forever, but will also teach their judgmental community a profound lesson about faith, perseverance, and seeing value where others see only waste. The morning sun cast long shadows across the auction yard as Sarah Miller clutched her worn leather purse against her chest, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The simple navy blue dress she wore, handmade from fabric she'd been saving for years, rustled softly in the October breeze. Her prayer cap sat perfectly pinned to her graying brown hair, though wisps of it had escaped during her buggy ride to the county auction house. At 45 years old, Sarah had the kind of face that had seen both joy and sorrow, lines around her eyes from years of genuine smiles, but a deeper crease between her brows that had formed during the 6 months since her husband David's passing. "Mama, are you certain about this?" Jacob whispered beside her, his broad shoulders hunched forward as if trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable among the crowd of English folk and the handful of Amish neighbors who had come to watch the proceedings. At 21, Jacob was the spitting image of his father, tall and lean, with kind brown eyes that seemed to absorb everyone's pain and hands calloused from years of honest farm work. His straw hat sat low on his forehead, partially hiding the worry that creased his young face. Sarah reached out and squeezed her son's hand, feeling the roughness of his palm against her own work-worn fingers. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, my son. I feel it in my bones. This is meant to be ours." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the absolute terror she felt at what she was about to do. In her purse sat $8,000, every penny she had left in the world after settling David's medical bills and the small debts he'd left behind. The oncologist bills alone had consumed their life savings, watching helplessly as the cancer slowly stole away the man who had been her rock for 23 years. The auctioneer, a portly man named Harold Jennings, with a voice like gravel and a permanent red flush to his cheeks, stepped up to the podium. His cowboy hat seemed out of place in rural Pennsylvania, but he wore it with the confidence of a man who'd sold everything from livestock to lakefront properties. "All right, folks. Next up, we got Lot 47, the old Hutchison Lake property. Now I'll be honest with y'all, this one's seen better days." A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. Sarah felt her cheeks burn as she noticed several of her Amish neighbors pointing and whispering. She recognized Martha Yoder, the bishop's wife, shaking her head with that particular expression of pious disapproval she'd perfected over her 60-some years. Next to Martha stood Rebecca Stoltzfors, whose sharp tongue had made her feared throughout their district. Even from 20 feet away, Sarah could hear Rebecca's harsh whisper, "Foolishness and pride. That's what this is. David would turn in his grave." The words stung like a physical slap. Sarah had to remind herself to breathe, to keep her composure. Jacob's hand tightened around hers protectively. Her son had been her rock these past months, working double shifts at the Miller's feed store in town to help make ends meet, coming home exhausted, but never complaining, always asking if she was all right, if she'd eaten, if she needed anything. The property includes approximately 12 acres. Harold continued, pulling up a photograph that made several people gasp and others laugh outright. The image showed what had once been a beautiful spring-fed lake, now choked with debris, old tires, rusted car parts, and years of accumulated trash. The shoreline was eroded and muddy, the dock had collapsed into the murky water, and an old abandoned shack leaned precariously on the north side, its roof caved in and walls covered in graffiti. Previous owner let it go to seed. As you can see, County's been trying to clean it up for years, but ran out of funding. Selling as is, all cleanup costs on the buyer. Who in their right mind would want that disaster? Someone called out from the back, prompting another wave of laughter. Sarah felt Jacob tense beside her. Her son had always been protective, always ready to defend her honor, but she'd taught him better than to let anger rule his actions. Still, she could feel the frustration radiating from him, like heat from a stove. Starting bid, we'll say $5,000, Harold announced, his voice carrying that particular tone of a man who expects no takers. Do I hear 5,000? Silence filled the auction yard. A crow cawed Joam in the distance. Someone coughed. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting, judging. She knew what they all thought, that grief had made her mad, that losing David had broken something fundamental in her mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was mad. But every night for the past 3 weeks, she'd dreamed of that lake, seen it as it could be, clear and sparkling, surrounded by wildflowers, a place of peace and healing. $5,000, Sarah heard herself say, her voice stronger than she felt. She raised her auction paddle with a hand that shook only slightly. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the whispers began, rushing through the crowd like wind through wheat fields. She's lost her mind completely, Rebecca Stoltzfus announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. First she lets that boy of hers work among the English, now this. It's shameful. That's what it is. The grief has addled her. Martha Yoida added, her voice dripping with false concern. Someone should speak to Bishop Ei about this. The woman needs guidance, maybe even. Going once, Harold interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Going twice, 6,000. The bid came from Thomas Weaver, a wealthy English developer known for buying up properties and turning them into expensive housing developments. He stood near the front, a smug smile on his clean-shaven face, his expensive suit making everyone else look shabby by comparison. Sarah recognized him. He'd tried to buy their family farm twice, after David's death, offering insulting low-ball prices while pretending to be charitable. Thomas turned to look directly at Sarah, his smile widening. Why don't you save yourself the embarrassment, Mrs. Miller? That property's worth nothing to someone like you. Go home and tend to your quilting, or whatever it is you people do. The casual cruelty of his words, the dismissive way he said you people, made something harden in Sarah's chest. She thought of David, of how he'd always told her she was stronger than she knew, braver than she believed. She thought of Jacob, who needed to see that they could still build a life, still find joy even after devastating loss. 7,000, Sarah called out, her voice clear and steady now. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. She was bidding against Thomas Weaver, one of the richest men in the county. It was David versus Goliath, except she wasn't even sure God was on her side anymore. Thomas's smile faltered for just a moment before returning. Harder now, meaner. 8,000. Sarah's heart sank. She had exactly $8,000. If she bid it all, she'd have nothing left. No cushion for emergencies, no money for food or supplies. Jacob would have to shoulder everything alone. But something in her refused to back down, refused to let this man's arrogance win. Mama, no, Jacob whispered urgently. That's everything we have. We can't. $8,000, Sarah interrupted, her voice ringing out across the auction yard. She stood straighter, meeting Thomas Weaver's shocked gaze with a calm she didn't feel. I bid $8,000. Thomas's face flushed red with anger. He opened his mouth, bid higher, then seemed to reconsider. The property wasn't worth much more than that, not with all the cleanup costs involved. He'd wanted it only to spite Sarah, to teach the uppity Amish woman a lesson, but he wasn't about to overpay for the privilege. Going once, Harold called, his voice betraying his surprise. Going twice, he paused, giving Thomas one more chance. When no counter bid came, he brought down his gavel with a sharp crack. Sold to Mrs. Sarah Miller for $8,000. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some people laughed openly, pointing at Sarah as if she were the main attraction in a circus. Others shook their heads in pity. The Amish neighbors gathered in small groups, their disapproval evident in every whispered word and sideways glance. "She's thrown away everything," Sarah heard Samuel Fisher say to his wife Hannah. "That lake is nothing but an eyesore and a money pit. They'll be destitute within a month. The boy will suffer for his mother's foolishness," Hannah replied, her voice heavy with judgment. "Mark my words, they'll come begging to the church for help before winter's end." Sarah tried to block out the voices, focusing instead on the papers Harold was preparing for her to sign. Her hands shook as she wrote her name. As she counted out the bills from her purse, 100 here, 50 there, all the money she'd saved from selling David's tools, from her quilting work, from the small inheritance David's mother had left them. Every dollar represented a sacrifice, a choice, a hope. "Mama, what have we done?" Jacob asked quietly as they walked away from the auction house, the deed clutched in Sarah's hands. His voice wasn't accusatory, just lost, confused, maybe a little frightened. Sarah stopped and turned to face her son, seeing the worry in his eyes, the way he was trying so hard to be strong for her when he was probably terrified. "We've taken a leap of faith, Jacob. We've chosen to believe that God still has good plans for us, even when the whole world says we're fools." "But what if they're right?" Jacob's voice cracked slightly, and Sarah saw the tears he was holding back. "What if this ruins us? What if I can't work enough to support us both? What if, then we'll face it together?" Sarah said firmly, reaching up to cup her son's face in her hands the way she'd done when he was a little boy, with scraped knees and bruised feelings. "Your father always said that faith isn't about knowing the outcome. It's about trusting in the journey." Behind them they could hear Thomas Weaver's voice, loud and mocking. "Give it a month before they realize their mistake. That trash heap of a lake will eat through whatever pennies they have left. Stupid Amish woman thinks she can make something of that disaster." His words were followed by cruel laughter from his companions. Sarah felt Jacob start to turn, his jaw clenched, his fists tight, but she held him back. "Let them laugh, my son. Let them mock. We know what we know." As they walked toward their buggy, Sarah noticed their horse, Gideon, waiting patiently where Jacob had tied him. The old bay gelding nickered softly in greeting, as if sensing the emotional turmoil of his owners. Jacob helped his mother into the buggy with gentle hands, his movements careful, protective. The ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. The October afternoon had turned cool, and Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. They passed the familiar landmarks of their community, the Stoltzfus farm, with its neat rows of corn stubble, the Yoder dairy with its black and white cows grazing in the pasture, the small schoolhouse where Sarah had once taught before Jacob was born. As they turned onto their own road, Sarah could see their small farmhouse in the distance, its white walls gleaming in the afternoon sun. David had painted it just 2 years ago, before the cancer diagnosis, when they'd still believed they had decades ahead of them. The barn needed work now. She could see where the red paint was peeling, where the roof sagged slightly. The fields they'd once cultivated sat empty, rented out to neighboring farmers for a small income that barely covered their basic needs. "Tomorrow we'll go see it," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Our lake. We'll see it properly, not just in auction photographs." "It's going to be worse than the pictures, Mama," Jacob said quietly. "You know that, right? It's going to be full of trash and chemicals and who knows what else. It'll take years to clean up, cost thousands we don't have. Then we'll start with what we can do," Sarah replied, her voice steady even as her heart raced with doubt. "One piece of trash at a time, one day at a time, just like we've been doing since your father passed." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I miss him so much, Mama. Every single day. And I'm scared. I'm scared we're going to lose everything. I'm scared I won't be strong enough to take care of you. I'm scared Dad would be disappointed in us for throwing away our security on a foolish dream. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. This was the first time Jacob had really opened up about his fears since David's death. Her strong, stoic boy who'd been trying so hard to be the man of the house, to fill shoes that could never really be filled. Your father would be proud of you, Jacob, she said softly. So proud, not because you're strong or because you work hard, though you do both, but because you're still willing to hope, still willing to dream. That's the bravest thing of all. They pulled into their driveway just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, and as Jacob helped Sarah down from the buggy and led Gideon to the barn, she stood for a moment looking at their home, at the life they'd built here, at the uncertain future that stretched before them. From somewhere down the road she could hear a buggy approaching. As it drew closer, she recognized Bishop Eli Miller. No relation despite sharing a last name, his long white beard flowing in the breeze, his expression stern and disapproving. Next to him sat Rebecca Stoltzfus, no doubt having rushed to report Sarah's shameful behavior at the auction. Sarah straightened her shoulders, preparing for the confrontation she knew was coming. The bishop pulled his buggy to a stop in front of her house, his pale blue eyes cold and judgmental. "Sarah Miller," he began, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority that had kept their community in line for 40 years. "We need to talk about your behavior today. The entire community is concerned about your mental state and your spiritual well-being." Here it comes, Sarah thought, the price of stepping outside the lines, of daring to hope for something different. But as she stood there facing the bishop's disapproval, she felt something unexpected, not fear or shame, but a quiet, stubborn strength. She'd spent her whole life being the perfect Amish wife, the obedient church member, the woman who never caused trouble or raised her voice. Maybe it was time to cause a little trouble. Maybe it was time to show Jacob that sometimes faith meant standing alone against everyone who said you were wrong. Maybe, just maybe, this was exactly what God wanted her to do. The bishop's buggy cast a long shadow across Sarah's yard as the evening sun dipped lower on the horizon. Bishop Eli Miller descended with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who expected the world to wait for him. At 73, he'd led their district for nearly 3 decades, his word carrying the weight of divine authority in the eyes of most community members. Rebecca Stoltzfus followed, her thin lips pressed into a line of righteous indignation, her dark eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone about to witness a scolding they'd personally orchestrated. Sarah stood her ground. Though her legs trembled beneath her skirts, she could hear Jacob in the barn, the familiar sounds of him tending to Gideon, the splash of water in the trough, the rustle of hay. Part of her wanted to call out to him, to have him stand beside her, but another part turned to shield him from what was coming. Her boy had been through enough without watching his mother be publicly shamed by the church elders. "Bishop Eli," Sarah greeted him with a small nod, keeping her voice steady. "Rebecca, what brings you to my home this evening?" "You know perfectly well what brings us," Rebecca snapped before the bishop could speak. "The whole county is talking about your shameful display at the auction. Bidding against an English man, throwing away your late husband's hard-earned money on that cesspool of a lake. It's disgraceful, Sarah. Disgraceful and prideful." And Rebecca, Bishop Eli held up a weathered hand, silencing her mid-tirade. His eyes, pale and watery with age, fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Sister Sarah, the community is deeply troubled by your actions today. We understand you're grieving, that the loss of David has been difficult, but this foolishness cannot stand." "Foolishness," Sarah repeated, feeling a spark of anger kindle in her chest. "Is it foolish to try to provide a future for my son, to invest in something that could give us hope?" "Hope?" Bishop Eli's bushy white eyebrows rose. "You call wasting $8,000 on a trash-filled lake hope? That money should have been saved, managed wisely, used to secure your future. Instead, you've thrown it away on English nonsense. Land speculation, Sarah. It's not our way. It's not speculation, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, despite the fear that made her hands shake. It's faith. It's believing that God can use even the most broken, discarded things to create something beautiful. Rebecca let out a harsh laugh. Beautiful? Have you seen that property? It's full of old tires and rusty metal, and God knows what kind of chemicals. You'll probably get sick just standing near it, and you want to drag your son into this madness. That poor boy has already lost his father. Now he'll lose everything else because his mother has lost her sense. The words hit Sarah like physical blows, each one designed to wound, to make her doubt, to break her resolve. She thought of Jacob, of his worried face at the auction, of how hard he'd been working to keep them afloat. Was she being selfish? Was she really putting her own stubborn pride ahead of her son's welfare? The church has discussed your situation, Bishop Eli continued, his tone becoming more authoritative. We're prepared to help you to contact the auctioneer tomorrow and see if the sale can be reversed. Perhaps Miss Weaver would be willing to take the property off your hands for a small loss. We could help cover the difference from the benevolent fund. You want me to go begging to Thomas Weaver? Sarah's voice came out sharper than she intended. That man who mocked me, who called us you people like we're less than human. Pride, Sarah, Bishop Eli said, shaking his head sadly. This is what I'm talking about. You're letting pride dictate your decisions. A humble woman would accept the help being offered, would acknowledge her mistake, and make it right. And if I don't believe it was a mistake? Sarah asked quietly. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Rebecca gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if Sarah had spoken blasphemy. Bishop Eli's face hardened, the pretense of concern dropping away to reveal the iron will beneath. Then you leave us no choice, he said, his voice cold now. The ordning is clear about members who refuse guidance from church leadership. If you persist in this reckless path, if you refuse to make this right, there will be consequence. The community cannot support someone who so flagrantly disregards wisdom and counsel. You're threatening to shun her. Jacob's voice rang out across the yard. Sarah turned to see her son striding toward them, his face flushed with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. For buying a piece of property, for trying to build something. Jacob, go inside, Sarah said quickly, but her son ignored her. No, Mama, he said, coming to stand beside her. I'm not going to watch them bully you. I'm not going to stand by while they threaten you for having the courage to hope for something better. This is exactly the problem, Rebecca interjected, her voice shrill. The boy has no respect, no understanding of proper order. Working among the English has corrupted him. Both of you have forgotten your place, forgotten the humble, simple life we're called to live. Humble, Jacob's voice rose. There's nothing humble about coming here to shame my mother for trying to provide for us. There's nothing simple about demanding she bow down to your idea of what's proper, while our own neighbors laugh at us and call us stupid. Jacob, Sarah grabbed her son's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles, seeing the rage and hurt in his eyes. This was exactly what she'd feared, that her actions would bring down judgment, not just on her, but on her boy. Please go inside. Listen to your mother, young man, Bishop Eli commanded, and remember who you're speaking to. I am the bishop of this district, and you will show respect. Respect? Jacob's laugh was bitter, harsh, like the respect you showed my father when he was dying, when you told him his cancer was probably punishment for some hidden sin, when you made him feel like he'd failed God because he couldn't work anymore. Sarah felt her blood run cold. She'd never known Jacob had heard those conversations, had witnessed the bishop's cruel attempts at spiritual counseling during David's final weeks. The pain in her son's voice broke her heart. That's enough, she said firmly, stepping between Jacob and the bishop. Jacob, please, go inside now. Please. For a moment, she thought he might refuse, might say more things that could never be taken back. But then she saw his shoulders slump, saw the fight drain out of him, replaced by a weariness that no 21-year-old should have to carry. Fine, he said quietly, but I'm not apologizing, not for speaking the truth. He turned and walked toward the house, his back rigid with suppressed emotion. Sarah watched him go, her heart aching. When she turned back to the bishop and Rebecca, their faces were masks of shocked disapproval. You see what your rebellion has wrought, Bishop Eli said, his voice heavy with judgment. Your son speaks against church authority with no remorse. This is what happens when a woman steps outside her proper role, when she makes decisions that should be left to wiser heads. Wiser heads, Sarah heard herself say, and was surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Bishop Eli, with all due respect, those wiser heads have never had to worry about how to feed their children or pay their bills. They've never had to watch their husband waste away while drowning in medical debt. They've never had to decide between buying medicine or keeping the electricity on for the medical equipment. We don't have electricity, Rebecca said sharply. That's against, I know what it's against. Sarah's voice cracked. David died in that English hospital because we couldn't afford the treatments that might have saved him. He died because we followed all the rules, trusted that God would provide, that the community would help. And where was that help when we needed it? Where was the community when I was selling everything we owned to pay the bills you all told us were God's will? The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam, months of grief and anger, and frustration that she'd kept bottled up, hidden behind a facade of quiet acceptance. Rebecca took a step back, her face pale, while Bishop Eli's expression hardened further. Careful, Sarah, he warned. You're speaking dangerously close to blasphemy, to question God's will. I'm not questioning God's will, Sarah interrupted. I'm questioning yours. I'm questioning a system that left my husband to die in pain because we couldn't afford help, that leaves widows to struggle alone while pretending to be a community. That lake, that broken, trashy, worthless lake, that everyone is mocking me for buying, at least it's honest about what it is. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. You've made your choice then, Bishop Eli said, his voice like ice. You reject the counsel of your church, the wisdom of your elders, the very foundation of our way of life. I reject hypocrisy, Sarah said quietly. I reject being told I'm foolish for having hope, for trying to build something for my son's future. If that means I'm not fit to be part of this community anymore, then so be it. Rebecca gasped again, louder this time. Sarah Miller, do you understand what you're saying? You're inviting the minding, the shunning. No one will speak to you, eat with you, do business with you. You'll be completely alone. I won't be alone, Sarah said, glancing toward the house where Jacob waited. I have my son, and I have my faith, real faith, not the kind that demands blind obedience and punishes questions. Bishop Eli's face had turned red with anger. You have until Sunday, he said, his voice shaking slightly, until Sunday service to come before the congregation. Admit your error and commit to selling that property. If you don't, the shunning will begin Monday morning, you and your son both. Both? Sarah's resolve wavered for the first time. Jacob hasn't done anything except defend his mother. You can't punish him for. He has shown disrespect and defiance. The bishop cut her off. He has spoken against church authority. Unless he repents as well, he will share your fate. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe, dragging Jacob into this, making him suffer for her choices that hadn't been part of the plan. Her son had his whole life ahead of him. Shunning would mean he couldn't work at the feed store anymore, couldn't interact with the Amish customers who made up most of his business. It could destroy his future. Please, she heard herself say, hating the pleading in her voice but unable to stop it. Please don't punish Jacob for my decisions. He's young. He was just being loyal to his mother. Don't ruin his life because of me. Then make the right choice, Bishop Eli said, his tone softening slightly, seeing an opening. Admit your error. Fix this mistake. Your son's future depends on it. Sarah looked toward the house, saw Jacob's silhouette in the window, watched her boy, her beloved son, who'd already lost so much. Could she really risk everything he had left for a broken-down lake and a foolish dream? But then she thought of David, of his final words to her. Don't let them make you small, Sarah. Don't let fear keep you from living. She thought of all the times she'd swallowed her voice, accepted decisions made for her, lived a life of quiet desperation disguised as pious humility. Where had that gotten them? David was still dead, They were still poor. Nothing had changed except now everyone knew they were failures. "No," she said softly. "What?" Bishop Eli leaned forward, as if he hadn't heard correctly. "No," Sarah repeated, louder this time. "I won't apologize for having hope. I won't apologize for trying to build something better. And I won't teach my son that the right thing to do is bow down to bullies just because they claim to speak for God." Rebecca made a sound like a strangled cat. "You're insane. Completely insane. You'll regret this, Sarah Miller. When you and that boy of yours are starving, when no one will help you, when you have nothing and no one, you'll wish you'd listened." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged, "but at least I'll still have my integrity. At least I'll be able to look my son in the eye and know I didn't teach him to abandon his dreams because other people said they were impossible." Bishop Eli straightened, his face a mask of cold fury. "So be it. As of Monday morning, you and your son are under the ban. May God have mercy on your souls." He turned and climbed back into his buggy, Rebecca scrambling after him. As they drove away, Sarah's legs finally gave out. She sank down onto the porch steps, her whole body shaking with the magnitude of what had just happened. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She'd chosen her own path over the community's approval, her faith over their fear. The front door opened behind her, and Jacob sat down beside her on the steps. For a long moment, neither spoke. The evening had grown fully dark now, stars beginning to appear in the autumn sky. In the distance they could hear the evening sounds of their Amish neighbors, the clop of hooves on pavement, the murmur of families gathering for dinner, the peaceful rhythms of a life that had just been forever closed to them. "I'm sorry," Sarah finally whispered. "I'm so sorry, Jacob. I never meant to drag you into this. I never meant to ruin your life, ruin my life." Jacob's voice was quiet but firm. He reached over and took his mother's hand, holding it tight. "Mama, you just showed me what real courage looks like. You stood up to the bishop, to the whole community, because you believe in something, because you have hope. How could that ever be ruining my life?" "But the shunning," Sarah said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "You won't be able to work at the feed store anymore. No one will do business with us. We'll have nothing, Jacob. Nothing but that worthless lake and each other." Jacob was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Dad told me something right before he died. I haven't told anyone because it seemed too personal, too private, but he said, 'Take care of your mother, Jacob, and don't let her forget how to dream.' I didn't understand what he meant then, but I think I do now." Sarah turned to look at her son, seeing tears on his own cheeks reflecting the starlight. "He said that. He said you'd spent your whole life making yourself smaller for other people, making your dreams smaller, your voice quieter, your life less than it could be. He said his biggest regret was not encouraging you to be bigger, braver, more yourself. He made me promise I wouldn't let you disappear after he was gone." Fresh tears flowed down Sarah's face. "Oh, Jacob." "So no, Mama," Jacob continued, his voice growing stronger. "You haven't ruined my life. You've shown me how to actually live it. And that lake, that broken, trashy, impossible lake, maybe it's exactly what we need. Maybe fixing it will fix us too." They sat together on the porch steps as night fell completely, mother and son, facing an uncertain future together. In 3 days, they would be shunned by everyone they'd ever known. They had no money, no support, and a property that everyone said was worthless. But sitting there in the darkness, hands clasped tight, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, real, terrifying, beautiful hope. "Tomorrow," she said finally, "we'll go see our lake. We'll see what we've really gotten ourselves into." "Tomorrow," Jacob agreed. Together, far down the road, they could see the lights of their neighbors' houses, warm and golden against the darkness. By Monday, those lights would represent homes closed to them, people forbidden to acknowledge their existence. But for now, for tonight, Sarah and Jacob sat together and looked up at the stars, the same stars that had guided their ancestors across oceans and through impossible hardship. If those ancestors could survive, so could they. If their faith had carried them through, Maybe it would carry Sarah and Jacob too. The lake waited for them, full of trash and secrets and possibility. Their old life was ending, but something new, something they couldn't quite see yet, but could feel in their bones, was beginning. Sarah squeezed Jacob's hand one more time, then stood up. "Come on, let's have some dinner. We'll need our strength for tomorrow." As they walked into the house together, Sarah took one last look back at the dark road, at the community that was about to cast them out. She felt fear, yes, but also something fiercer, something stronger. She felt ready. The battle for their future was about to begin, and Sarah Miller was done being small. She was done being quiet. She was done letting other people's fear dictate her life. Whatever came next, whatever trials awaited them at that lake, she would face them with her head held high and her son by her side. God help anyone who tried to stop them. The morning sun was barely a sliver of gold on the horizon when Sarah woke to the sound of Jacob already moving around downstairs. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with everything that had happened, everything that was about to change. In 2 days, on Monday morning, their shunning would begin. 2 days to prepare for a life of isolation. 2 days before every door in their community closed against them. Sarah dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, her fingers automatically moving through the familiar motions, the plain dress, the apron, the prayer cap pinned carefully in place. How much longer would she wear these clothes? Once they were shunned, would she still consider herself Amish? The questions swirled in her mind like autumn leaves in a windstorm, beautiful and terrifying and impossible to catch. Downstairs she found Jacob had already made coffee, real coffee, the expensive kind they usually saved for special occasions. The rich aroma filled their small kitchen, mixing with the smell of the bread he was toasting over the wood stove. He looked up as she entered, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with determination. "Figured we needed the good stuff today," he said, pouring her a cup. "Big day ahead." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm mug. Through the kitchen window, she could see their breath fogging in the chilly October air. "You didn't have to get up so early." "Couldn't sleep anyway," Jacob admitted. "Kept thinking about the lake, about what we might find there, about what happens next week when—" He trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah watched her son spread butter on his toast, with the same careful precision he'd inherited from his father, and her heart ached with love and guilt in equal measure. 21 was too young to be cut off from everything you'd ever known, too young to face the kind of hardship that was coming. "We could still back out," she said quietly. "I could go to Bishop Eli this morning, tell him I was wrong, that grief made me foolish. We could probably get most of the money back if we moved fast enough." Jacob looked up sharply. "Is that what you want?" Sarah thought about it honestly, really examined her heart. Did she want to crawl back to the bishop, to Rebecca Stoltzfus, to all those people who'd laughed and mocked and judged? Did she want to teach her son that the safe path was always the right path, that dreams should be abandoned at the first sign of difficulty? "No," she said finally. "No, it's not what I want. But Jacob, this is your life too. I need to know you're truly okay with this, that you're not just going along because you feel obligated to support your foolish mother." Jacob set down his toast and reached across the table to take her hand. "Mama, last night was the first time since Dad died that I felt like we had a future. Not just survival, day after day, but an actual future with possibilities. That lake might be full of trash now, but it's also full of potential, and even if we fail, even if it turns out to be the disaster everyone says it will be, at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have been brave enough to hope." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes again. When had her little boy become so wise? "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become." "Then let's make him proud of both of us," Jacob said, standing up and clearing their plates. "Let's go see what we've bought ourselves." An hour later, they were in their buggy heading toward the lake property, Gideon's hooves clip-clopping steadily along the paved road. The morning was crisp and beautiful, the kind of autumn day that made Pennsylvania look like a painting, trees ablaze with red and gold, fields of dried corn stalks rustling in the breeze, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at it. As they drove, they passed several Amish farms. Sarah saw curtains twitch as they went by, faces appearing in windows, people watching their journey. News traveled fast in their community. Everyone would know about yesterday's confrontation by now, about the impending shunning. Some faces showed pity, others judgment, but none showed support. Not a single person waved or nodded in greeting. "They're all watching," Jacob observed, his jaw tight, waiting to see us fail. "Let them watch," Sarah said, though her heart felt heavy. She recognized these people: Hannah Fisher, who'd taught her to make apple butter when she was newly married; Solomon Lapp, who'd helped David build their barn; young Mary Byler, who Sarah had delivered into the world 20 years ago. Soon all these familiar faces would become strangers, forbidden to acknowledge her existence. They turned off the main road onto a narrow dirt lane marked with a faded "for sale" sign that someone had already spray-painted with crude words. The buggy bounced over potholes and ruts, tree branches scraping against the sides. This path hadn't been maintained in years, maybe decades. Weeds grew knee-high on either side, and Sarah could see evidence of illegal dumping: old mattresses, bags of trash, even a rusted refrigerator tossed carelessly into the ditch. "Good Lord," Jacob muttered, guiding Gideon carefully around a particularly deep pothole. "This is worse than I thought. We knew it would need work," Sarah said, though her own confidence was wavering. What had she done? What had she dragged them into? The lane opened suddenly into a clearing, and there it was, their lake. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, though not from beauty. The photographs at the auction hadn't lied. If anything, they'd been generous. The lake stretched before them, maybe 2 acres of murky brown water choked with debris. Old tires floated like terrible lily pads, their centers filled with stagnant water. Shopping carts jutted from the shallows like bizarre sculptures. Plastic bags and bottles created a colorful but heartbreaking mosaic across the surface. The smell hit them next: decay and chemicals and neglect, sharp enough to make Sarah's eyes water. The shoreline was worse. Years of erosion had created muddy banks littered with trash, beer cans, fast food containers, broken glass that glittered dangerously in the sunlight. The old dock they'd seen in the photos had completely collapsed, its rotted pilings sticking up like broken teeth. The abandoned shack leaned at such a precarious angle that it seemed one strong wind would knock it over completely. Jacob brought the buggy to a stop, and they both sat in silence, staring at the disaster before them. Sarah felt her throat tighten with tears she refused to shed. This was it. This was what she'd spent everything for, what she'd risked everything for. $8,000 for a toxic waste dump that would probably cost 10 times that to clean up. "Oh, Mama," Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. "What have we done?" Sarah wanted to cry. She wanted to turn the buggy around, go straight to Bishop Eli, and beg for forgiveness. She wanted to admit that everyone had been right. She was a foolish, grief-stricken woman who'd made a terrible mistake. But then she noticed something. Beyond the trash, beyond the decay, the lake's shape was beautiful. It curved in a gentle crescent, with natural banks that would be perfect for sitting and fishing once they were cleared. Trees surrounded it on 3 sides, old oaks and maples that must have been there for 100 years or more, their roots protected even through all the neglect. And on the far side, she could see a natural spring feeding into the lake, the water there slightly clearer, fighting against the pollution. "Look," she said, pointing to the spring. "The water is still trying to clean itself. It's still alive, Jacob. Underneath all this trash, underneath all this damage, there's still something worth saving." Jacob followed her gaze, and she saw something shift in his expression. "It's like us," he said slowly, "broken and damaged and surrounded by garbage, but still fighting, still alive. They climbed down from the buggy and walked carefully to the water's edge, avoiding the worst of the trash. Up close, the smell was even stronger, and Sarah had to breathe through her mouth to keep from gagging. Jacob picked up a stick and poked at what looked like an old tire, half submerged in the mud. "We'd need equipment to clean this up properly," he said. "A boat to pull stuff out of the water, tools to remove the big pieces, probably need to have the water tested for contamination. And that's before we even think about rebuilding the dock, or fixing the shack, or making the place actually usable." "One step at a time," Sarah said, though her heart was sinking. The task ahead seemed impossible, overwhelming. "We start with what we can do ourselves. We pick up the trash we can reach. We clear the shoreline. Sarah Miller." A voice called out from behind them. They turned to see a pickup truck pulling into the clearing, kicking up dust. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman Sarah didn't recognize. Maybe 40 years old, with short gray hair and kind brown eyes, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. "Yes?" Sarah said cautiously, instinctively moving closer to Jacob. "I'm Linda Chen," the woman said, walking toward them with an easy smile. "I run the environmental restoration group for the county. Heard you bought this place at auction yesterday. Wanted to come by and introduce myself, see if maybe we could help each other out." "Help each other?" Jacob asked, his tone skeptical. After yesterday's treatment, Sarah understood his wariness of English strangers. Linda nodded, surveying the lake with a practiced eye. "This lake has been on our radar for years. The previous owner died intestate, took forever for the county to get control of it, and then we ran out of funding for cleanup. We've been trying to figure out how to restore it without breaking our budget." She turned back to them with a hopeful expression. "When I heard someone actually bought it, I thought maybe we could work something out. We provide the expertise and some equipment. You provide the land and labor. Split the costs. Share the results." Sarah and Jacob exchanged glances. This seemed too good to be true, and Sarah's experience had taught her that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. "Why would you want to help us?" Sarah asked bluntly. "You don't know us, and frankly, after yesterday, I'm not sure I trust English charity." Linda's expression softened with understanding. "I heard about what happened at the auction. Thomas Weaver is a piece of work, and I'm sorry you had to deal with that. As for why I want to help, this is what I do. I restore damaged ecosystems, clean up polluted areas, try to undo some of the damage we humans have done to the world. This lake is a perfect project for us. Plus," she smiled slightly, "I have to admire anyone brave enough or crazy enough to take this on. That takes or stupidity," Jacob muttered, but Sarah could hear the hope creeping into his voice. "Maybe a bit of both," Linda agreed cheerfully. "Look, I'm not asking you to decide right now, but if you're interested, come by the county environmental office next week. We can run water tests, assess the damage, come up with a restoration plan, free of charge, no strings attached. After that, you can decide if you want to work with us or not." Sarah wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to grab onto this lifeline with both hands, but caution held her back. "What would working with you entail exactly?" "We'd provide technical support, some equipment, access to volunteer groups who specialize in cleanup projects. You'd retain ownership of the land, make all final decisions about how it's developed. Think of us as consultants, rather than partners. We help you do the work. You let us use this as a teaching project for our environmental education programs. Win-win." It did sound too good to be true, but as Sarah looked at the overwhelming disaster of the lake, at the impossible task ahead of them, she realized they couldn't do this alone. Pride wouldn't clean up toxic water or remove tons of trash. Pride wouldn't give them the knowledge and resources they needed to actually succeed. "We'll think about it," Sarah said finally. "And thank you for coming out here, for not laughing at us like everyone else." Linda's expression grew serious. "Sarah, I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've seen millionaires fail at projects easier than this one. I've seen professional companies with unlimited budgets give up on less polluted sites. The fact that you're even trying, that you're standing here looking at this mess and not running away screaming, that tells me something about your character. You're going to need help. Let us provide it. After Linda left, Sarah and Jacob spent another hour walking the perimeter of the property, taking mental inventory of the disaster they'd inherited. The shack was beyond saving, rotted through, probably full of mold and pests. The land itself was overgrown with invasive species, thorny bushes and poison ivy choking out native plants. There was evidence of illegal activity, empty beer bottles, drug paraphernalia, graffiti covering every flat surface. We could accept her help, Jacob said as they completed their circle back to the buggy. Linda seemed genuine. And God knows we need all the help we can get. Linda works for the county, Sarah pointed out. The same county that laughed at us yesterday. What if this is some kind of trick? What if they're trying to take the land back for unpaid cleanup fees? Or something? What if it's not a trick? Jacob countered. What if it's exactly what it seems, someone offering to help because they believe in the project? We can't let fear and suspicion keep us from accepting good things, Mama. Sarah knew he was right, but trust was hard after everything they'd been through. Still, looking at the enormity of the task before them, she knew they had no choice. They would need help. Lots of it. Okay, she said finally. Monday, after the shunning begins, we'll go see Linda at the county office. We'll hear what she has to say. Monday, Jacob agreed quietly. The day hung between them, heavy with meaning. Monday, when their old life would officially end, and this new, uncertain one would truly begin. They rode home in silence, each processing what they'd seen, what they'd taken on. As they turned onto their road, Sarah saw several of their neighbors standing in yards, watching them pass. Solomon Lapp actually turned his back deliberately, a preview of what Monday would bring. Hannah Fisher shook her head sadly, her judgment clear even from a distance. Only one person waved, young Mary Byler, who caught Sarah's eye and gave a small secret gesture of support before her mother, Rebecca Stoltzfus's sister, yanked her inside. It was a tiny thing, barely noticeable, but it made Sarah's heart lift just a fraction. When they reached home, they found a box sitting on their porch. No note, no indication of who'd left it. Jacob opened it carefully to reveal food, fresh bread, preserves, dried meat, vegetables from someone's garden, anonymous kindness from someone who couldn't publicly support them, but wanted to help anyway. Not everyone agrees with the bishop, Jacob said softly, holding up a jar of what looked like Martha Yoder's famous apple butter. Not everyone thinks we're fools. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes again. They'll suffer if they're caught helping us. Then we'll make sure they're not caught, Jacob said firmly. And someday, when we've cleaned up that lake, when we've made it beautiful again, they'll see that their faith in us wasn't misplaced. That night, Sarah lay awake long after Jacob had gone to bed, listening to the familiar sounds of their farm. The creak of old wood settling, the rustle of wind through the eaves, the distant lowing of a neighbor's cow. These sounds had been the soundtrack of her entire adult life. After Monday, she would still hear them, but she would be alone with them, cut off from the community that created them. She thought about David, about whether he would approve of what she was doing. She thought about the lake, about the impossible task of transforming that disaster into something beautiful. She thought about Jacob, about the future she was trying to build for him, and whether she was being brave or just desperately foolish. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow would be their last day as part of the community, their last chance to change their minds and choose the safe path. Bishop Eli would be expecting her at the church service, waiting to see if she would bend, if she would apologize, and make everything right. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed, not for guidance about what to do, because she already knew what she had to do. Instead, she prayed for strength. Strength to face the shunning, strength to tackle the overwhelming work ahead, strength to be the mother Jacob needed, to honor David's memory, to see this through to whatever end awaited them. In the darkness, she could almost hear David's voice. "Don't let them make you small, Sarah. Don't let fear keep you from living." "I won't," she whispered. "In the night. I promise I won't." Outside, the October wind picked up, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. Change was coming, inevitable as the seasons, terrible and beautiful all at once. Sarah pulled her quilt up to her chin and listened to the storm building in the distance, knowing that by Monday night everything would be different. The lake waited for them, full of secrets and possibilities. Their old life was ending. Their new life, whatever it would be, was about to begin. God help them both. Sunday morning dawned, grey and heavy with the promise of rain. Sarah stood at her bedroom window, watching dark clouds gather on the horizon, and felt like the weather was reflecting her soul. In a few hours she would have to make the walk to church, face the entire community one last time before they cast her out. Part of her wanted to simply not go, to stay home and avoid the confrontation altogether. But that would be cowardice, and she'd come too far to back down now. She dressed with extra care, choosing her best Sunday dress, the deep purple one David had always loved, saying it brought out the blue in her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she pinned her prayer cap in place. Would this be the last time she wore these symbols of her faith? Once shunned, would she still be Amish in any meaningful way? Downstairs, Jacob was already dressed in his Sunday black, his face pale but determined. They'd barely spoken since waking, both wrapped in their own thoughts, their own fears about what the day would bring. Sarah made a simple breakfast of oatmeal and toast, but neither of them ate much. The food sat heavy in her stomach, each bite an effort to swallow. "We don't have to do this," Jacob said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. "We could pack up the buggy right now, leave before the service even starts, go somewhere new, start over where nobody knows us." Sarah looked at her son, saw the fear beneath his brave facade. He was so young to be facing this, so young to have his whole world torn apart. "And go where, Jacob? We have no money, no connections outside our community. We'd be completely alone." "We're about to be completely alone anyway," he pointed out. "At least if we left now, we'd have some dignity. We wouldn't have to stand there while everyone we've ever known turns their backs on us." The temptation was strong. Sarah could picture it, sneaking away like thieves in the night, avoiding the confrontation, the public humiliation. But that wasn't who she wanted to be. That wasn't what she wanted to teach Jacob. "No," she said firmly. "We face this with our heads held high. We let them see that we're not ashamed of choosing hope over fear." And maybe her voice caught slightly. Maybe there's someone in that church who needs to see that it's possible to stand up for yourself, even when the whole world says you're wrong. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Dad would have been proud of you, Mama. You know that, right?" "I hope so," Sarah whispered. "God, I hope so." The ride to church was surreal. They passed other buggies heading the same direction, families in their Sunday best, but no one waved or acknowledged them. Children who usually called out greetings stared silently from buggy windows. Adults looked straight ahead, pretending Sarah and Jacob didn't exist. The shunning hadn't officially started yet, but people were already practicing, already distancing themselves from the contamination of rebellion. The church building came into view, a simple white structure with a cemetery out back where generations of their community rest. Sarah had attended services here her entire life. She'd been baptized here at 16, married David here at 22, mourned him here 6 months ago. Every significant moment of her spiritual life had happened within those walls. After today, she would never be welcome inside again. They arrived to find the parking area already full of buggies. Through the open doors, Sarah could hear the congregation singing, their voices rising in the familiar German hymns she'd known since childhood. For a moment, the sound was so beautiful, so achingly familiar, that she almost couldn't bear it. Jacob must have felt the same because she saw him blink rapidly, fighting back tears. "Ready?" she asked, though she herself felt anything but ready. "No," Jacob admitted, "but let's do it anyway." They walked up the steps together, hand in hand like Sarah used to do with him when he was a little boy frightened of thunderstorms. The singing faltered as they entered, voices trailing off mid-hymn as heads turned to stare. Sarah kept her eyes forward, focusing on Bishop Ei at the front of the church, his face a mask of stern disapproval. The silence was absolute now, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, that made your heartbeat sound like thunder. Sarah and Jacob walked down the center aisle to their usual pew, except when they reached it, the people already sitting there shifted away, creating a buffer of empty space, as if Sarah and Jacob carried a plague. They sat down alone, surrounded by empty pew on all sides. Sarah could feel hundreds of eyes boring into her back, could hear the whispers starting up like a swarm of angry bees. She sat straight and tall, her hands folded in her lap, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Bishop Eli cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the silent church. "We were in the middle of hymn 42, he said, his voice cold. "Let us continue." The singing resumed, but it was different now, harsher, louder, as if the congregation was trying to drown out the presence of the sinners in their midst. Sarah tried to join in, but her throat was too tight, the words she'd sung 1,000 times suddenly foreign on her tongue. Beside her, Jacob sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tight she worried he might crack his teeth. The hymn ended, and the church settled into the familiar rhythm of the service. But everything felt wrong, distorted. When it came time for the sermon, Bishop Eli chose his text with deliberate cruelty. The story of Korah's rebellion against Moses, how the earth opened up and swallowed the rebellious, how God punished those who questioned rightful authority. "Pride," the bishop intoned, his eyes fixed on Sarah, "is the root of all sin. The prideful heart that refuses guidance, that rejects wisdom, that places its own desires above the good of the community. Such a heart invites destruction. Such a heart leads not only to its own damnation, but drags down others with it." Sarah felt each word like a physical blow, but she refused to lower her gaze, refused to show shame she didn't feel. Let him rage, let him preach. She knew the truth of her own heart, knew that what she felt wasn't pride but hope, not rebellion but faith in something bigger than their small community's rigid rules. "We see such pride even now," Bishop Eli continued, his voice rising. "A woman who refuses the counsel of her elders, who wastes her husband's legacy on foolishness, who leads her son astray with her stubborn willfulness. This is the cancer that threatens our community, the rot that must be cut out before it spreads." Around them, Sarah could hear murmurs of agreement, amens, whispered like curses. But she also noticed, hidden in the crowd, a few faces that looked troubled, uncertain. Young Mary Byler, tears streaming down her face. Old Samuel Lapp, who looked more sad than angry. Even Martha Yorda seemed uncomfortable, shifting in her seat, avoiding Sarah's eyes. The sermon went on for what felt like hours, each word another condemnation, another stone thrown at Sarah's character, her faith, her worth as a mother and woman. Jacob's hand found hers under the cover of her skirt, squeezing tight, and she squeezed back, drawing strength from him as he drew strength from her. Finally, mercifully, the sermon ended. But Sarah knew the worst was yet to come. This was the moment when Bishop Ei would call for the vote, when the community would formally declare the shunning. This was the point of no return. "Sister Sarah," Bishop Ei addressed her directly, his voice echoing through the silent church. "You have heard the word of God. You have been given time to reflect on your actions, to see the error of your ways. Do you now, before this congregation and before God himself, repent of your prideful rebellion? Do you commit to selling that property and returning to humble obedience?" Every eye was on her. Sarah could feel the weight of expectation, the collective hope that she would break, that she would crawl back and beg forgiveness. How easy it would be to do just that, to stand up, bow her head, murmur the expected words of contrition. How simple to just give in, give up, accept defeat. She thought of the lake, of that poisoned water still trying to clean itself. She thought of David's last words, his plea that she not let them make her small. She thought of Jacob beside her, who needed to see that standing up for yourself was worth it, even when it cost everything. Sarah stood slowly, her legs shaking but her voice steady when she spoke. No, Bishop Eli, I will not repent for having hope. I will not apologize for trying to build a better future for my son. And I will not teach Jacob that the right thing to do is abandon your dreams the moment they become difficult. A collective gasp swept through the congregation. Rebecca Stoltzfus stood up, her face red with rage. The audacity, the absolute sit down, Rebecca, Bishop Eli commanded, though his own face had gone pale with shock. He'd clearly expected Sarah to cave, expected fear to win out over faith. Sister Sarah, do you understand what you're doing? Do you comprehend the consequences of your defiance? I understand perfectly, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. You're going to cast me out for refusing to live in fear. You're going to punish my son for standing by his mother. You're going to shun us, isolate us, try to break us, and you'll do it all while claiming to act in God's name. How dare you? Martha Yoder stood now, her usually kind face twisted with anger. You question the authority of the church. You stand there, bold as brass, and accuse us of— I accuse you of nothing, Sarah interrupted, her eyes sweeping across the congregation. I simply refuse to participate in my own diminishment. I refuse to teach my son that safety is more important than integrity, that fitting in matters more than being true to yourself. You're teaching him to be worldly, Rebecca shouted, to be prideful and defiant, and I'm teaching him to have faith, Sarah said simply. Real faith. The kind that acts even when the outcome is uncertain. The kind that hopes even when everyone says hope is foolish. Bishop Eli raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice was cold as winter frost. Then you leave us no choice, as of this moment, Sarah Miller. You are placed under the ban. And Jacob Miller. He turned his gaze to Sarah's son. You have heard your mother's defiance. Do you join her in rebellion? Or do you choose to remain faithful to our community? Sarah's heart stopped. She'd known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it terrifyingly real. She turned to Jacob, saw the agony on his young face. This wasn't fair. He shouldn't have to choose, shouldn't have to sacrifice his entire life because of her decisions. Jacob, she whispered urgently, quietly enough that only he could hear. You don't have to do this. You can stay. I release you from any obligation to stand with me. Please don't throw away your future. Jacob looked at her, and Sarah saw tears streaming down his cheeks, but she also saw something else. Determination, strength, and a fierce kind of love that made her own tears fall. I'm not throwing away my future, Mama, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Then he stood, turning to face the bishop and the entire congregation. I stand with my mother. Whatever she faces, I face it too. No, Sarah breathed, even as her heart swelled with pride and broke with grief in the same moment. So be it, Bishop Eli pronounced, his voice like a death knell. From this day forward, Sarah Miller and Jacob Miller are under the ban. No member of this community shall speak to them, eat with them, do business with them, or acknowledge their presence in any way. They are as dead to us, cut off from the body of Christ, until such time as they repent and seek reconciliation. Let all here witness and uphold this judgment. We witness, the congregation responded, unison, the words reverberating through the church like a funeral dirge. And just like that, it was done. Sarah and Jacob were officially outcasts, ghosts, non-person. Around them, people began to stand and move away, creating an ever-widening circle of empty space. Some faces showed satisfaction. Rebecca Stoltzfus looked positively gleeful. Others showed sadness. Old Samuel Lapp had tears in his eyes. But all of them participated. All of them turned their backs. All of them chose the community over compassion. Sarah took Jacob's hand. "Come," she said quietly. "Let's go home." They walked back down the aisle, through the sea of turned backs and averted eyes. The silence was complete now, heavy as a shroud. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply stood, witnesses to Sarah and Jacob's exile, participants in their isolation. As they reached the door, Sarah heard a small sound, a sob, quickly stifled. She turned to see young Mary Byler, tears streaming down her face, her hand half raised as if to wave goodbye before her mother grabbed it and forced it down. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Sarah saw in Mary's face everything she herself had felt at that age, the desperate desire to be true to yourself while also belonging, the terrible choice between authenticity and acceptance. Then they were outside, the cool morning air hitting their faces like a slap. Behind them they could hear the service resuming, the sound of hymns rising once more, the community closing ranks and moving on as if Sarah and Jacob had never existed. Jacob was shaking, his whole body trembling with suppressed emotion. Sarah led him to their buggy, helped him climb in even though at 21 he was far too old for such mothering. But right now, he wasn't a man facing the world. He was her little boy who needed comfort, who needed to know Nuv would somehow be okay. "I'm sorry," she whispered, holding him as he finally broke down, sobs racking his frame. "I'm so sorry, Jacob." "Don't be," he managed to say through his tears. "Don't you dare apologize for showing me what courage looks like, for teaching me that some things are worth fighting for, even when you lose everything else." They sat there in the buggy for long minutes, holding each other, crying together, mourning the life they'd just lost. Around them the world continued. Birds sang, wind rustled through leaves, clouds moved across the sky. But inside, everything had changed. They were different people now than they'd been an hour ago. Freer, perhaps, but also more alone than either had ever imagined possible. Eventually, Sarah wiped her eyes and gathered the reins. "Let's go home," she said. "Tomorrow we start on the lake. Tomorrow we begin building our new life." As they drove away from the church, Sarah looked back one last time. She saw faces in the windows, watching them leave. Some judgmental, some sad, some simply curious about what would happen to the outcasts. She wondered if any of them truly believed they were doing the right thing, or if they were just too afraid to question, too scared to stand alone. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thought. The grey morning had turned to light rain, gentle drops that seemed to wash away the old world and prepare the ground for something new. When they reached their farm, everything looked the same: the white house, the red barn, the field stretching into the distance. But it all felt different now. This was no longer a home within a community. It was an island, isolated and alone. Inside they found another anonymous box on the porch, this one filled with canned goods and a hand-knitted blanket. No note, but the message was clear. Somewhere out there, someone cared, someone disagreed with the shunning but couldn't say so publicly. It was a small comfort, but Sarah clung to it like a lifeline. That evening, as the rain continued to fall, Sarah and Jacob sat together at the kitchen table, planning their next moves. Tomorrow they would go see Linda Chen at the county environmental office. Tomorrow they would begin the impossible task of transforming that toxic lake into something beautiful. Tomorrow they would start proving everyone wrong. "Do you really think we can do this?" Jacob asked, his voice raw from crying, from exhaustion, from the emotional toll of the day. Sarah thought about the question honestly. Did she think they could clean up that disaster of a lake with no money, no help, and an entire community hoping they'd fail? Did she believe they could survive being shunned, isolated, cut off from everything they'd ever known? Did she have faith that this insane gamble would somehow pay off? "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know we have to try." I know that giving up now would mean they were right about us, that we're nothing without their approval. And I refuse to believe that. I refuse to let them define who we are or what we're capable of. Jacob nodded slowly. Then we try. We give it everything we have. And if we fail, at least we fail on our own terms. If we fail, Sarah echoed, reaching across the table to take her son's hand. But maybe, just maybe, we won't. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the world clean, preparing the ground for new growth. Sarah and Jacob sat together in the lamplight, planning and dreaming, two people against the world, but together, always together. The lake waited for them, full of secrets and possibilities. Their old life was gone, burned away like chaff in the wind. Their new life, whatever it would be, was about to begin in earnest. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of their lives. Tomorrow would be the first step on a journey that would either destroy them or transform them into something they'd never dreamed possible. Sarah looked at her son, saw the fear and determination warring in his eyes, and felt a fierce love bloom in her chest. They would face this together. They would fight together. And together, somehow they would find a way to not just survive, but to thrive. The storm outside grew stronger, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling through the eaves. But inside, Sarah and Jacob sat in their small circle of light, making plans, building dreams, refusing to surrender to the darkness, pressing in from all sides. They were shunned. They were alone. They were facing an impossible task, with no resources and no support. But they were together, and they were free, and they still had hope. And sometimes, hope was enough to change the world. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the storm having washed the world clean overnight. Sarah woke before dawn, her body accustomed to the rhythms of farm life, even though everything else had changed. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the silence, no longer the comfortable quiet of a peaceful morning, but the heavy silence of isolation. Today was the first official day of their shunning. Today, their new life truly began. She found Jacob already in the kitchen, cooking breakfast with movements that seemed too deliberate, too controlled, as if he was trying to hold himself together through sheer force of will. His eyes were red-rimmed from a sleepless night, and Sarah's heart ached for him. 21 years old, and he'd just lost everything. His community, his friends, his entire social world, because he'd chosen to stand by his mother. "Morning, Mama," he said quietly, managing a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning, son." Sarah moved to help him, and they worked together in companionable silence, each drawing strength from the other's presence. The breakfast was simple: eggs from their chickens, bread they'd baked yesterday, coffee that tasted bitter this morning, like everything else. After eating, they prepared for their trip to town. Sarah changed into one of her simpler dresses, suddenly self-conscious about her Amish clothing in a way she'd never been before. Would the English people stare? Would they judge? Would they treat her differently now that she was an outcast even among her own people? The ride to town was different than it had ever been. They passed several Amish farms, and where before there would have been waves and friendly calls, now there was only silence and turned backs. Samuel Lapp, working in his field, deliberately faced away as they passed. Hannah Fisher, hanging laundry, went inside the moment she saw their buggy approaching. Even the children, playing in yards, were quickly called inside by watchful mothers. "It's like we're invisible," Jacob murmured, his hands tight on the reins. "No," Sarah corrected gently. "If we were invisible, they wouldn't have to work so hard not to see us." They arrived at the county environmental office to find Linda Chen waiting for them with a warm smile that felt like sunshine after days of rain. She didn't seem to care about their Amish clothing or the circumstances that had brought them here. She simply greeted them like fellow human beings worthy of respect. "I'm so glad you came," Linda said, ushering them into her office, a cluttered space filled with maps and environmental reports and photographs of restored wetlands. "I've been thinking about that lake all weekend. I really believe we can make something special there." Over the next hour, Linda laid out her vision. She showed them water quality reports from years ago, when the lake had been pristine. She explained the restoration process, how they could use natural filtration systems, introduce beneficial plants and microorganisms, gradually transform the toxic water into a thriving ecosystem. She talked about grants they could apply for, volunteer organizations that specialized in environmental cleanup, equipment they could borrow or rent at reduced rates. The key is patience, Linda explained, spreading blueprints across her desk. This won't happen overnight. We're looking at months, maybe even a year or more of consistent work. But the end result will be worth it, a beautiful natural lake that could serve as a sanctuary for both wildlife and people. Sarah felt hope rising in her chest, fragile but real. You really think we can do this? I've seen worse transformations, Linda assured her. There was a lake in Ohio, 10 times more polluted than yours, that's now a state park. A toxic waste site in Michigan that's become a nature preserve. Nature wants to heal, Sarah. It's remarkably resilient. We just have to give it a chance and do the hard work. They spent another 2 hours going over details, making lists, developing a timeline. Linda introduced them to her assistant Marcus, a young black man with an infectious enthusiasm for environmental restoration. Together they created a plan that felt both overwhelming and exciting. Phase 1 would focus on removing the visible trash, Phase 2 on water quality improvement, Phase 3 on habitat restoration and development. We'll start this Saturday, Linda announced. I've already contacted several volunteer groups. We should have at least 20 people to help with the initial cleanup. Marcus will bring equipment, a small boat, trash collection tools, safety gear. All you need to do is show up ready to work. As they were leaving, Linda touched Sarah's arm gently. I heard about what happened yesterday, she said quietly. About the shunning. I'm sorry. That must be incredibly difficult. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness, the acknowledgement of her pain. Thank you, she managed to whisper. For what it's worth, Linda continued, I think you're incredibly brave. What you're doing, standing up for yourself, for your dreams, that takes real courage. Don't let anyone tell you different. The ride home felt lighter somehow, despite the continued snubs from their Amish neighbors. They had a plan now, a concrete path forward. The impossible task suddenly seemed merely difficult, and difficult they could handle. But as they pulled into their driveway, they found Thomas Weaver's expensive truck parked outside their house. The developer leaned against it, a smirk on his clean-shaven face, clearly waiting for them. Well, he drawled as they approached. If it isn't the Amish woman who thinks she's smarter than everyone else. How's that trash pit working out for you? Sarah felt Jacob tense beside her, but she placed a warning hand on his arm. What do you want, Mr. Weaver? Just came by to make you an offer, Thomas said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. I'll buy that worthless lake off you for $5,000. That's $5,000 more than it's worth, and it'll save you the embarrassment of failing publicly. The property cost $8,000, Jacob said sharply. Thomas shrugged. That was before you got yourselves shunned. Before you lost all your community support. $5,000 is generous, considering your desperate situation. Take it or leave it. Sarah looked at the paper he was holding out, at the easy way out he was offering. $5,000 would give them some breathing room, some security. It would mean admitting defeat, yes, but it would also mean not having to face the monumental challenge ahead. No, she heard herself say. Thomas's smirk faltered. No? You're turning down $5,000? Are you insane? Perhaps, Sarah said calmly. But that lake is ours, and we're going to restore it. We're going to prove that broken things can be made beautiful again. You're delusional, Thomas spat, his facade of friendliness dropping away to reveal contempt. You're a foolish woman playing at being independent when you have no idea what you're doing. You'll fail, and when you do, I'll be here to buy that property for pennies on the dollar. You'll be begging me to take it off your hands. Then I guess you'll be waiting a long time, Jacob said, stepping forward protectively. My mother said no. Now get off our property. For a moment Sarah thought Thomas might argue, might even become violent, but then he seemed to recalculate, probably remembering that assault charges wouldn't help his development business. He climbed into his truck with deliberate slowness, making them wait. "You'll regret this," he called through the window. "Both of you, you're throwing away your last chance at salvaging anything from this disaster." As he drove away, kicking up gravel and dust, Sarah felt her knees go weak. She'd just turned down $5,000, money they desperately needed for a dream that might never materialize. Was she being brave or just stupidly stubborn? "You did the right thing, Mama," Jacob said, as if reading her thoughts. "That man would have turned our lake into another soulless development, destroyed it completely. At least this way, we're trying to save it, to make it something meaningful." That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she found herself drawn to David's old Bible, the one with his handwritten notes in the margins. She opened it randomly and found herself reading Hebrews 11:1. "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." That's what this all came down to. Faith that they could succeed against impossible odds. Faith that broken things could be restored. Faith that standing alone was better than compromising your integrity. The week passed in a blur of preparation. They visited the lake each day, walking its perimeter, making notes, planning the work ahead. Each visit revealed new challenges. The water was even more polluted than they'd thought, the shoreline more damaged, the task more overwhelming. But each visit also revealed new possibilities. A family of ducks still lived in the cleaner part fed by the spring. Wildflowers struggled to bloom amid the weeds. The bones of something beautiful persisted beneath the decay. They also felt the weight of the shunning more acutely each day. When Sarah went to the general store for supplies, the Amish clerk refused to serve her, forcing her to deal with the English owner who looked at her with pity and curiosity. When Jacob passed former friends on the street, they crossed to the other side, eyes averted, as if he carried a plague. The isolation was crushing, a constant reminder of everything they'd lost. But there were also unexpected kindnesses. Anonymous boxes of food kept appearing on their porch. Once they found a bag of tools, used but functional, hanging on their barn door. Someone was helping them in secret, risking social censure to offer support. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool but sunny, ideal for outdoor work. Sarah and Jacob arrived at the lake before dawn to find Linda and Marcus already there, setting up a command center with supplies and equipment. As the sun rose, volunteers began arriving, college students from the environmental club, retirees looking for meaningful projects, families wanting to teach their children about conservation. By 8 o'clock, over 30 people had gathered, far more than Linda had predicted. She organized them into teams. Some would work on removing large debris from the water. Others would clear the shoreline. Still others would begin documenting the extent of the damage for grant applications. Sarah and Jacob worked alongside the volunteers, pulling trash from the water, filling bag after bag with decades of accumulated waste. It was hard, dirty, exhausting work. The smell was terrible, the mud sucked at their boots. The sheer volume of trash seemed endless. But there was also something deeply satisfying about it, something almost sacred about reclaiming this wounded place. "Your mother is quite a woman," Linda said to Jacob during a break, as they watched Sarah direct a group of volunteers on the safest way to remove a partially submerged shopping cart. "Most people would have given up by now." "She's the strongest person I know," Jacob said quietly. "Losing my father almost destroyed her. But somehow, this lake saving it, it's like it's saving her too." As the day wore on, the transformation became visible. The shoreline began to emerge from beneath the trash, revealing the natural beauty that had been hidden. The water, while still polluted, looked less choked as major debris was removed. The collapsed dock was completely cleared away, making room for a new one someday. During lunch, one of the volunteers, a grandmother named Judith, approached Sarah. "I heard about what happened with your church," she said gently. "I'm sorry, that must be so painful." Sarah was taken aback by the directness, but also grateful for the acknowledgement. Thank you. Yes, it's been difficult. My daughter, Judith, continued. She left our church years ago because she was gay. They shunned her too, told us we had to choose between her and God. Judith's eyes filled with tears. We chose her, of course. How could we not? And you know what? Life outside those rigid walls. It's been hard, but it's also been free. Really, truly free. Do you regret it? Sarah asked. Leaving. Judith smiled through her tears. Not for a single moment. We found a new church, new community, people who love us for who we are, not who they think we should be. You will too, Sarah, you and your son. This lake, she gestured at the slowly emerging beauty around them. This is just the beginning. As the sun began to set, the volunteers gathered for a final assessment. They'd removed over 2 tons of trash, cleared the entire visible shoreline, and made a significant dent in the water cleanup. It was exhausting, dirty work, but the sense of accomplishment was palpable. This is incredible, Linda announced, surveying their work. In one day we've accomplished what I thought would take weeks. Sarah, Jacob, you should be so proud. Sarah looked at the lake, still far from perfect, still scarred and damaged, but undeniably better than it had been that morning. She thought about what Judith had said, about freedom and new beginnings. She thought about David, about how proud he would be. Thank you, she said to the assembled volunteers, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you all for believing in this, for helping us prove that broken things can be made beautiful again. As the volunteers dispersed, making plans to return the following weekend, Sarah and Jacob stood alone at the lake's edge, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. The water was clearer than it had been, clear enough that Sarah could almost see the bottom near the shore, could almost imagine what it would look like when it was truly clean. We did it, Jacob said, wonder in his voice. We actually did it, Mama. We made a difference. We've just started, Sarah corrected, but she was smiling. We have so much more to do, but we're not alone, Jacob pointed out. All those people today, they believed in us. They helped us. We're building a new community, Mama, different from the old one, but maybe better, maybe more real. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. Your father would be so proud of you, Jacob, so proud of the man you've become. He'd be proud of both of us, Jacob said, pulling his mother into a hug. We're doing exactly what he asked. We're not letting them make us small. We're living big, Mama. We're living brave. They stood there as darkness fell, 2 figures silhouetted against the lake they were slowly bringing back to life. In the distance they could see the lights of Amish farms, the community that had cast them out, but those lights no longer held the same power over them. They had found something better, freedom, purpose, and a future they were building with their own hands. The lake still held secrets beneath its surface, still had mysteries to reveal, but Sarah and Jacob had already discovered the most important truth, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from everything you know, trust in hope over fear, and believe that broken things, broken lakes, broken lives, broken hearts, can be restored if you're willing to do the work. Monday would bring new challenges. The shunning would continue, the isolation would remain, the struggle would persist, but they had proven something crucial. They could survive. They could even thrive. They were not defined by their community's rejection, but by their own courage, their own faith, their own determination to create something beautiful from disaster. As they drove home under a canopy of stars, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in months: peace. Not the false peace of avoiding conflict, but the deep peace of knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do. The lake waited for them, patient and full of promise. Their old life was truly gone now, but their new life, this brave, uncertain, beautiful new life, was just beginning. And together, mother and son, faith and hope, They would see it through to the end. Whatever that end might be, they would face it together, with heads held high and hearts open to the possibilities that lay ahead. The broken lake was teaching them the most valuable lesson of all, that redemption is always possible, transformation is always within reach, and sometimes the things the world discards as worthless contain the greatest treasures of all. 5 years later, Sarah stood at the edge of the lake, hardly recognizing it as the same place they'd bought that fateful autumn day. The water sparkled crystal clear in the morning sun, reflecting the sky like polished glass. Native plants lined the shore, cattails and wild irises, joe pye weed and purple coneflowers. A new dock stretched into the water, sturdy and welcoming. The old shack had been replaced with a small, simple building that served as an environmental education center. "Mama, they're here," Jacob's voice called out. Sarah turned to see her son, now 26, married to Emily, one of the volunteers who'd helped with that first cleanup, leading a group of visitors down the path. These were 8th graders from the local school, here to learn about environmental restoration and the power of perseverance. As Jacob began his presentation, sharing the story of how this toxic waste dump had been transformed into a thriving ecosystem, Sarah slipped away to the quiet spot David had always loved, a bench under the old oak tree, looking out across the water. She thought about everything they'd discovered in those early months of cleanup, how they'd found, buried in the mud of the lake bottom, an old metal box containing Civil War era coins and documents worth nearly $2 million, treasure hidden by the original property owner's ancestor over 150 years ago. How that discovery had provided the funds to properly restore the lake, to build the education center, to create something that served the whole community. She thought about how their Amish neighbors had reacted when the news broke, some with jealousy, others with shame at how they'd treated Sarah and Jacob, a few with genuine happiness for their success. How Bishop Eli had quietly approached her at the market one day, his face lined with age and regret, to say simply, "You were right, I was wrong, I'm sorry." How the shunning had been quietly lifted, though by then Sarah and Jacob had built such a rich life outside the strict Amish community that they chose to remain independent, attending the Mennonite church in town instead. Most of all, she thought about the hundreds of lives this place had touched. The school groups who learned about environmental science, the troubled teens who found purpose in restoration work, the families who came for quiet reflection beside the peaceful water. The lake that everyone had mocked as worthless junk had become a sanctuary for healing, a classroom for learning, a testimony to the power of faith and perseverance. "Mrs. Miller?" A young voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah turned to see a girl of about 13, tears streaming down her face. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. How did you do it?" the girl asked. "How did you keep going when everyone said you were wrong? When everyone laughed at you?" Sarah looked at this child and saw herself at that age, full of dreams but afraid to voice them, wanting to be brave but not knowing how. She thought about what to say, what truth to share that might help this young person navigate her own difficult journey. "I had my son," Sarah said finally. "I had faith, not blind faith, but faith in the possibility of transformation. I had hope that broken things could be made beautiful. And most importantly, I had love. Love for my son, love for this land, love for the person I knew I could become if I was brave enough to try." The girl nodded, wiping her eyes. "My parents want me to give up art school. They say it's not practical, that I'll never make a living. But art is everything to me. It's who I am." Sarah took the girl's hands in her own. "Then don't give up. The world will tell you 1,000 times that your dreams are worthless, that you should be practical, play it safe, do what everyone expects. But the world needs dreamers. The world needs people brave enough to believe in impossible things." And sometimes she gestured at the sparkling lake. The things that seem most worthless turn out to hold the greatest treasures. The girl hugged her impulsively, fiercely, then ran back to join her class. Sarah watched her go, hoping she'd helped, hoping her story would give this child the courage to pursue her own dreams. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah walked down to the water's edge and dipped her fingers in, feeling its coolness, its clarity. This lake had saved her life as surely as she'd saved it. It had given her purpose when she'd lost everything, had taught her that redemption was always possible, that transformation was always within reach. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Jacob, Emily beside him, their 2-year-old daughter named Sarah, after her grandmother, toddling between them. Behind them came an unexpected visitor, young Mary Byler, now a woman of 25, who had finally found the courage to leave the strict Amish community and pursue her education. "We wanted you to be the first to know," Mary said, her face glowing with joy. "I got accepted to nursing school. I'm going to be a nurse. Help people the way you helped me, by showing me it's okay to choose your own path." Sarah felt tears of joy streaming down her face. This was what it had all been for. Not just the lake's transformation, but the transformation of people's lives, the courage her story had given others to pursue their own impossible dreams. As they all stood together at the lake's edge, Sarah, Jacob, Emily, little Sarah, Mary, and the students gathering nearby, Sarah felt David's presence so strongly it was as if he stood beside her. She could almost hear his voice. "You didn't let them make you small, my love. You lived brave, you lived big, you changed the world." And she had, not by being perfect, not by never making mistakes, but by refusing to give up when everyone said her dream was worthless. By believing that broken things could be restored, that hope was stronger than fear, that love could transform even the most damaged, discarded, impossible situations into something beautiful. The lake sparkled in the sunlight, alive with fish and frogs and dragonflies, surrounded by wildflowers and visitors, a testament to the power of persistence and faith. What the world had called junk had held a $2 million secret. Yes, but the real treasure wasn't the coins they'd found. The real treasure was the journey itself, the courage to hope, the strength to persevere, the love that had sustained them through the darkest times. The real treasure was standing here now, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched and changed, knowing that choosing the hard path, the brave path, the path everyone said was foolish, had led to something more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. Sarah closed her eyes and breathed in the clean air, listened to the gentle lap of clear water against the shore, felt the warmth of sun on her face and the presence of loved ones around her. This was grace. This was redemption. This was what happened when you refused to let fear win, when you chose hope over despair, faith over doubt, love over judgment. "Thank you, David," she whispered to the wind, to the water, to the memory of the man who had believed in her, even when she hadn't believed in herself. "Thank you for teaching me to dream. Thank you for our beautiful son. Thank you for everything." As if in answer, a breeze rippled across the lake's surface, creating patterns of light and shadow, of beauty and grace. Sarah opened her eyes to see Jacob watching her, understanding in his gentle gaze. He took her hand, and together they stood at the edge of the miracle they had created. This broken, discarded, impossible place that had become a sanctuary, a classroom, a testament to the truth that nothing is ever truly worthless if someone is brave enough to see its potential and persistent enough to do the work of transformation. The lake had taught them everything they needed to know about life, about faith, about love. It had taught them that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is bet everything on hope, trust in the possibility of restoration, and refuse to let the world's judgment dictate your worth or your dreams. And as Sarah stood there, surrounded by love, looking at the sparkling water that had once been a toxic wasteland, she knew with absolute certainty that every moment of struggle, every tear shed, every doubt faced and conquered, had been worth it for this moment, this peace, this joy. Worth it to know that she had lived bravely, loved fully, and transformed not just a lake but her own life, her son's life, and the lives of countless others who would find inspiration in their story. The poor Amish farmer who'd been mocked for buying a junk lake had found far more than a $2 million treasure. She had found herself, found freedom, found faith that could move mountains and transform wastelands into gardens. And that Sarah knew as she stood in the sunshine with her family around her and her restored lake sparkling before her was worth more than all the money in the world. That was the real miracle, the true treasure, the gift that would keep giving long after she was gone. Hope, courage, love, and the unshakable faith that broken things, broken lakes, broken lives, broken hearts can always be made beautiful again.